Good morning. Welcome to this morning's legislative hearing. We're going to hear testimony today on three particular pieces of legislation. The first bill is an outstanding bill that I introduced along with Ranking Member Mike Michaud. It's H.R. 813, Putting Veterans Funding First, Act of 2013. Second, 806, a bill introduced by Ms. Brownlee. And the third bill is a bill I again have joined with the ranking member in introducing the Department of Veterans Affairs Budget Planning Reform Act for 2013. First, let me focus my opening remarks on H.R. 813. As most of my colleagues are aware, just over 4 years ago, we started providing VA's medical care budget 1 year in advance. And of course, the reason behind the law that directed this change in practice was pretty simple. A full-year appropriations bill for VA had been enacted on time in only 4 of the prior 20 years. According to VSOs and VA officials, delayed appropriations inhibited the ability of program administrators to plan effectively. So the hiring of doctors and nurses was being delayed. Medical equipment purchases were being put off. Veterans experienced unacceptable wait times for medical appointments due to rationing. By providing the medical care budget in advance, no longer would funding for VA's health system be held hostage to the gridlock that we've grown accustomed to here in the nation's capital. I had hoped that things would improve in the intervening years, but unfortunately not much has changed. We're still lurching forward with stopgap funding measures and periodic threats of shutdowns of the government. So when I introduced the Putting Veterans Funding First Act earlier this year, all of government was operating under a CR, or a continuing resolution. It wasn't until March, nearly 6 months into the fiscal year, when a full year appropriation was finally enacted. So although VA health care was protected, the other 14% of VA's discretionary spending was being held in limbo. Things like VA's information technology systems, claims processing, facility construction, medical research projects, veteran cemeteries. Full year funding for all of these items was in doubt until the very end. Here we are, yet again, with the status of next year's appropriation bills in the air. There's no agreed upon budget framework. The House and the Senate are miles apart on our appropriations measures, and the administration has even issued a veto threat on the House-passed funding bill for VA for reasons that have nothing to do with the bill itself. Once more, political calculations having nothing to do with our veterans are putting our collective support for funding for their benefits and services at risk. I think we would all agree that our veterans deserve better than this. So I listened carefully to the statements of support on the floor for advanced appropriations during debate on the FY14 VA Milcon bill. Members from both parties spoke in high praise, one touting, quote, absolute peace of mind and no worries, end quote, brought to veterans through the advanced appropriations process. I heard another hail, quote, platform for long-term planning and investment is critical, quote, and still another lauded it as providing, quote, timely and predictable resources, end quote. And I agree with those statements wholeheartedly. Each area requires advanced planning for staffing, equipment, or contract services, all of them that is made more difficult when there is no certainty of what the full year funding level will be. So putting veterans funding first would end the uncertainty by ensuring VA has its full discretionary appropriation well before its fiscal year begins. And I'm grateful that the support the bill has garnered across a wide spectrum of veterans organizations. It's entirely consistent with the protections afforded to veterans funding in law that currently exists today. VA is exempt from sequester, and it receives 86% of its discretionary funding already in advance. 813 just goes that extra mile. So in the face of dysfunction that exists at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, this is one area where we can continue to get it right. I want to thank my colleagues who have already supported the bill. I'd ask those who haven't joined us in truly putting veterans funding first. And I want to recognize now my good friend and ranking member from Maine, Mike Michaud, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this very important hearing this morning. The three measures before us looks at planning, funding, and oversight. Individually, each measure is very beneficial. But when we look at together, they provide an analytic and transparent framework for VA, Congress, and other stakeholders. They ensure requested resources are sufficient to meet the current and future needs of veterans. They also ensure that these resources achieve the best outcome for veterans. I want to thank the chairman for bringing forward his bill, H.R. 813. I believe that in order to extend advance appropriations for the remaining VA discretionary accounts, we must have strong confidence that the underlying budget projections are appropriate within a long-term context. The context must include a forward-looking strategy with goals and objectives and a 5-year plan with expected outcomes, milestones, and resources. There must be a greater visibility for Congress into the assumptions, definitions, and details then that provides the top-line appropriation accounts. This information will ensure us that all VA's missions are identified, planned, and executed. This will also give us insight into any trade-offs VA may make between resources and outcomes and enable us to better oversee whether the VA is meeting its stated goals with executed resources. Before we budget and appropriate dollars, we must plan in programs. This is a nutshell of my bill, the Department of Veterans Affairs Budget Planning Reform Act of 2013. My bill will codify a VA planning program, budgeting, and evaluation, or PPBE system. The PPBE is best practices currently used by leading corporations, important segments of our federal government as well. For planning, it looks at the strategic level by means of a quadrennial veterans review, the QVR, that periodically assesses the changing environment. The QVR ensures VA is in a position to meet the evolving needs of our veterans. For programming, it aligns resources and efforts with the strategic direction by means of a 5-year program. This lays out the path and outcomes and resources to get there. The 5-year program looks beyond a single year's budget and next year's forecast and forces the VA to accurately and fully account for the taxpayers' dollars that is provided to the VA. It would provide Congress a vital tool that we need to use to assess the effectiveness of VA in meeting its responsibility. The bill designates a chief strategy officer to ensure that the planning and programming phases of the process receives equal consideration with the budget and execution phases. All these stages must be in place to create a mechanism that will better ensure that the VA budget provides the resources tailored to the missions of the department and that the need for these resources is fully defensible. The bill does not graft Department of Defense or Department of Homeland Security policies onto the VA. This bill uses these agencies as a model, but it is crafted to meet the unique needs of veterans and the VA. DOD is significantly larger than VA, has a different mission, and has over 50 years of experience operating under a PPBE system. There is no expectation that the VA can or should match what DOD does today. It is a principle of long-range planning and programming that the VA should adopt, not the 8,500 DOD program elements or their resources-intensive approach. My bill recognizes VA's current efforts and intended to support these efforts while making sure Congress has access to the information we need to do our job. For the last few years, VA has experienced a period of budget growth and has been led by a secretary who supports analytic and transparent budget developments. But we cannot expect these conditions to be permanent. We should use this opportunity we have today to build a lasting framework to enable VA to meet its mission today and tomorrow. Fiscal constraints must come, and leadership will transcend. We must prepare now for VA to meet the challenges. Codify a VA PPBE system in statutes to ensure continuance in good time and during bad times. I recognize that PBBE mechanism is a change in the way VA has done financial management. Change is hard. Not everyone will be comfortable with this change, but change is necessary if we are to position the VA to meet its responsibilities and fulfill its mission in the coming years. Change is necessary if we are to perform our responsibility as Congress. My bill and the bills before us today acknowledges that the status quo is no longer acceptable. And this acknowledgement requires that we take action. So I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your help and support with my bill, and then having the committee look at the broader picture of VA budgeting and planning. And with that, I yield back, and I'd ask unanimous consent that my full remarks be entered into the record.
Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks. Ms. Brownlee, I'd like to recognize you to discuss your bill, H.R. 806.
Thank you, Chairman Miller and Ranking Member Michaud, for holding this important full Veterans Affairs Committee legislative hearing today. H.R. 806, the Veterans Healthcare Improvement Act, was the very first bill that I introduced as a new member of the 113th Congress. I'm grateful that the full committee is considering this important legislation. As ranking member of the subcommittee on health, I believe as we all do, I believe it's vitally important to ensure adequate funding for veterans' health care programs. I am sure the committee knows in 2006, 2007, and 2008, the prior administration's budget request for VA health care was not sufficient to meet the needs of our veterans. The funding shortfall in those years forced Congress to provide supplemental appropriations to ensure the VA would have sufficient funds to continue to provide basic health care services to our nation's veterans. In 2009, Congress passed the Veterans Health Care Budget Reform and Transparency Act, which provided for advanced appropriations for Veteran Health Administration programs. It also ensured the accuracy of the administration's advanced budget request. Congress also included a requirement for the GAO to review the accuracy of the administration's advanced budget projections. Pursuant to this law, the GAO issued reports reviewing the 2011 and 2012 advanced appropriations requests for veterans health care. It's my understanding that the 2013 report will soon be issued. The GAO report has helped Congress and this committee to evaluate the accuracy of the administration's budget projections. It also ensures the VA is functioning based off of accurate information. And most importantly, this GAO review has provided Congress with third-party neutral assurance that the VA would not run out of money for veterans health care. Unfortunately, this GAO reporting requirement is scheduled to sunset at the end of the calendar year. While the GAO reviews have largely confirmed that the current administration is budgeting sufficient sums for veterans' health care, I am concerned that without this review, future budget projections could be inaccurate and risk our ability to adequately meet the health needs of our men and women veterans. We owe it to our current and future veterans to ensure the VA never again runs low on resources to provide health care to our veterans. They risked their lives to serve our country. Our job is to ensure that we take care of them at home. Allowing this GAO review to sunset puts veterans' health care in jeopardy. We cannot take that risk. With the drawdown of forces in Afghanistan, we will soon see a huge increase in the number of veterans accessing VA health care. Now is not the time to eliminate the GAO review. That is why in February I introduced H.R. 806, which makes permanent the requirement for GAO to review the accuracy of advanced appropriation requests for veterans health care. Passage of my bill will help Congress continue to evaluate the accuracy of the budgeting process and, most importantly, ensure our nation's veterans receive vital health care services. I am profoundly grateful for the service and sacrifices made by all of our nation's veterans, and their families. As members of this committee, it is our duty to ensure veterans always receive the benefits they need in a timely and efficient manner. Again, I would like to thank the chair and the ranking member and the members of this committee for considering this important legislation. I'd also like to thank all of the veteran service organizations here today who fight every day on behalf of our nation's veterans. I look forward to discussing this legislation further and happy to answer any questions, and I yield back.
Thank you very much,
Balance of
Ms.
my
Brownlee.
time.
I appreciate the comments that you've made on H.R. 806. I want to welcome our first panel to the table today. Mr. Robert Snyder is the Acting Assistant Secretary for the Office of Policy and Planning for the Department of Veterans Affairs. He's joined by two individuals. Ms. Helen Tierney is with him, and Mr. Dwayne Fleming is with him as well. Mr. Snyder, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Miller, Ranking Member Michaud, distinguished members of the Veterans Affairs Committee, thank you for your unwavering commitment to veterans and for this opportunity to testify on 3 bills related to VA strategic planning, programming, and budgeting efforts. In addition to the other 2 VA witnesses, let me also acknowledge the veteran service organizations here today. Their insights are always appreciated. Mr. Chairman, I ask that my written statement be included for the record.
Without objection.
With the support of this committee, we have improved our planning and resource allocation processes, but we know we can do better. In regards to H.R. 813, Putting Veterans Funding First, Act of 2013, the bill would extend the authority for advance appropriations to all of VA's discretionary accounts, effective in 2016. Such a proposal needs to be considered by the administration as part of an across-the-government review of the advantages and disadvantages, not only for VA, but potentially for other departments and agencies. Only in the context of a broad review could the administration offer an opinion on making such a change. We cannot, therefore, offer a position on H.R. 813 at this time. We very much appreciate the concern for veteran services reflected in the proposal and look forward to working with the committee on how to best maintain the provision of benefits and services in light of fiscal uncertainty. In reference to H.R. 806, the bill would establish a permanent requirement for an annual report by the Comptroller General on the Department's medical budget submissions. Congress established a temporary requirement in the Veterans Health Care Budget Reform and Transparency Act. VA does not support making these reports permanent. VA has expanded the information presented in the budget justification volumes each year in order to be more transparent and to include additional information sought by Congress. VA believes this information, as well as continuing congressional oversight and engagement by GAO, will ensure the transparency of VA's medical budget process. In regards to the draft bill entitled Department of Veterans Affairs Budget Planning Reform Act, VA greatly appreciates the concepts in the bill as they have much in common with current VA initiatives. For instance, VA has initiated a planning, programming, budgeting, and execution framework modeled after similar efforts used in other federal agencies. The Department has embarked on its own quadrennial strategic planning process, or QSPP, which we believe is consistent with the aims of the bill to formalize the strategic planning effort that will drive the 5-year programming process and the near-term budget development. The final results of our first QSPP, a new VA strategic plan for 2014 to 2020, will be published with the President's 2014 budget submission. We have already had productive briefings on the development of that plan with your staff and will continue that dialogue as we finalize the plan. VA's QSPP includes an environmental scanning and analysis phase and has some of the same general goals as the Department of Defense Quadrennial Defense Review. Although we believe an attempt to replicate the scope of the QDR is not appropriate for the VA. The Quadrennial Veterans Review proposal would also require a broader role for VA in developing a national veteran strategy. VA believes that its emerging work in futures analysis has the same intent as the QVR proposal, but a national veteran strategy would require broad analysis and policy development that would go well beyond VA. VA has also been working towards building a multi-year programming capability. The Secretary signed the Future Years Veterans Plan covering the fiscal years 2015 to 2019 on April 30th, 2013 to document the results of our first true programming effort. While we believe the intent of Section 2 of the bill will be met by our emerging PBB process, we do have reservations about a mandate to publish specific dollar and FTE projections beyond the budget submission. We look forward to working with the committee to address your oversight requirements in this process. Section 3 of the draft bill would also require the designation of a chief strategy officer. VA strongly supports the bill's intent, as these areas are listed in the bill are being performed by the Office of Policy and Planning. However, VA is hesitant to codify those responsibilities in statute because they may restrict our ability to tailor them as required in the future. Finally, in regards to Section 4, VA has conducted self-evaluations and implemented numerous organizational changes in the Office of the Secretary and throughout VA. For example, organizations were established within my office, the Office of Policy and Planning, to build the same capabilities that this proposed legislation intends to codify. VA recognizes there is always more to do, but believes our existing planning processes are adequate to consider organizational changes. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on these three important bills. We appreciate the committee's attention to these critical topics as we work together to better serve our nation's veterans. Mr. Chairman, we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Snyder, for your testimony. We appreciate you being here with us today. You cited in your testimony a need for a across-the-board, government-wide review of the advantages and disadvantages of advanced funding as outlined at Mr. Michaud in my legislation. Needless to say, I'm discouraged by that comment, and I guess from a little historical perspective, I want to know what across the government review was done prior to the advanced funding for VA medical care was done.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not familiar with what research was done before that legislation was submitted. I'd be happy to take that.
Well, it was,
get that additional
it was well over
record.
3/4 of the funding. And it appears that there is an issue with the administration to go forward with the rest of those dollars, and it's much smaller than what we're talking about today. So I'm trying to figure out 86% of VA's discretionary budget is already advanced, and now we're talking about 14%. So why the pushback on 14%?
Well, Mr. Congressman, we certainly do appreciate the congressional support for the VA's advanced appropriations for medical care accounts. They've enabled multi-year medical budget planning and have ensured uninterrupted services, medical services for our veterans. However, the proposal to expand VA appropriations to all of our discretionary accounts does need to be considered by the administration for its impact, the precedent that it sets on other agencies.
But isn't the president's, isn't that already set? We've done that. I think we clearly say that funding for veterans programs is separate. And it's protected from sequester. There are unique differences between the funding at the Department of Veterans Affairs and all other agencies within the U.S. government. And I just can't, I'm trying to figure out why the pushback on 14%.
Again, Mr. Chairman, that is a...
Well, let me do this. Let me quote the President at the bill signing. Quote, "At this very moment, the VA is operating without a budget, making it harder for VA medical centers and clinics to deliver the care our vets need. It's frustrating for VA employees, and it's frustrating for our veterans who pay the price when budgets are delayed. This is inexcusable, it is unacceptable, and it is time for it to stop." End quote. So what about the sentiment of the President expresses doesn't hold true for the other accounts?
Again, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate this committee is eager to get a position on 813, but until the administration conducts this cross-government review, we cannot offer a position on
So it's not, today it's not inexcusable, it's not unacceptable, or it is excusable and it is acceptable, and we don't have to stop the budgetary issue. I don't know. I may be alone in what I'm trying to figure out, but we took a huge swing at advanced funding for VA, and all of a sudden, we're trying to protect this 14%. It's I don't know. It's frustrating when there's no full year budget to manage the claims processing system, a system that we have all talked about, the massive delays that exist within that system, the veteran cemetery system, the information technology systems as we move forward, and just to hear we've got to do a government-wide review of the impacts to look at the precedent which has already been set. But with that, Mr. Michaud, you recognize.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank the panelists for being here today. You had mentioned that the current strategic planning is, you've adopted some other, I assume the Department of Defense type model, but specific as it relates to the VA, you've modified that proposal. My question is, are you, when you talk about PPBE, how are your current PPBE efforts being received across VA and within VA leadership?
Well, thank you, Congressman, for the opportunity to comment on that. In fact, we've actually looked at DOD, DHS, NASA, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration for examples of models that we could look at. But we, as you mentioned, we do have to modify it to meet VA's needs, requirements, mission, and culture. And that is where we're working. We feel that we have matured the process. We've done one programming cycle, meaningful programming cycle. We feel it's demonstrating the value to internal stakeholders of the department, and we believe that those stakeholders are bought in so that their momentum and support for PBBE will transcend this administration.
You said you believe they are bought in. Are they widely and actively embracing the PPBE?
Yes, Congressman, they are. In fact, the reviews of our FY15 budget proposal were based upon the programming decision memorandum that the Secretary signed in April.
Okay.
So that has been reinforced.
To follow up on the Chairman Miller's comment on, in your testimony, you indicated that in across the board review, the advantages and disadvantages of advanced appropriation. Who within the administration is looking at that across the board review?
Mr. Congressman, I appreciate that you're anxious to get our position on this. I would like to take that request for the record and get back to you.
So is the short answer no one's looking at it?
So the short answer is I don't know.
Okay.
And need back to you on the record.
Because if I remember correctly, the president actually supported mandatory funding during the campaign. And he made it clear that it would be in his budget when he presented it to Congress, which he did not. It was because of the VSOs that we actually were able to get advanced appropriation for VHA. So it's consistent with what he said he wanted to do. So that's why I'm kind of curious on who in the administration is taking this review, if it's really being reviewed at all, which I quite frankly doubt that anyone in the administration is doing that. The other question that I have, when you look at the the new framework in codifying some of the stuff that you're currently doing now, whether it's PPBE efforts or other areas, administrations change. And if you look at what's happening over VA recently, with a lot of people resigning and retiring over at the department, my big concern is the fact that it's not going to be consistent. And as members of Congress, you look at the Department of Veterans Administration, the second largest federal agency in the federal government, and we got to have something, I think, in writing as we deal with the VA's budget that will give us the information that we need so we can analyze whether or not the VA is going in the right direction, number one, as well as whether or not we can look long-term to make sure that our veterans are getting the appropriate services that they need. And so that's why kind of a little concerned that you don't want to codify it in statute. So when it should be actually, you should be embracing that, because you're not going to be there, for the duration of the VA and the needs for our veterans. And so I'd like to elaborate a little bit more why you're kind of hesitant to codify this into statute, because it looks like you're doing some of it right now anyway. So, but you're not going to be there forever.
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify our position. We certainly appreciate the committee's intent behind this proposed legislation and your support for PBBE. Before codifying in statute, we just feel like we should do our jobs and codify in directive, internal directive, followed up by implementing guidance in a handbook. And before we could do that, we had to mature the process to a point that we could codify that. We've gone through enough now that we think we can write that directive. We think we need one more cycle of the programming effort before we can codify the implementing instructions in handbook. Again, we do think these efforts will transcend and have the buy-in to continue beyond the current administration. So it's not that we don't want to codify, we'd like to codify ourselves before it's put in statute.
Okay, thank you. I see my time's run out, but can you do it within 3 years, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Snyder, you're accompanied by Ms. Tierney. Ms. Tierney, you're the executive in charge for the Office of Management and Chief Financial Officer. Would you be the person that would be doing the government-wide review, or would you be involved in it in one way or another?
Sir, I would participate in it, but this is the Office of Management and Budget will be doing the review.
And how would you participate?
I would advocate the VA position.
And that position is what?
I am not able to comment on that at this time.
And again, now you just said, Mr. Snyder, that you couldn't have a position until you did a government-wide review. Ms. Tierney, you just said your job was to advocate VA's position. How can you advocate a position you don't have until after the review is done?
Thank you, Chairman. When the review starts, I anticipate that VA will be involved in that review.
And you will be advocating VA's position?
Sir, yes, that's what I would do for VA.
And so
Absolutely.
VA will have a position before the review is complete?
Chairman, I believe that is correct, yes.
Mr. Runyon.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to not even ask a question, but give you a real-life scenario that I've experienced personally in my own district, dealing with specifically the portion of the budget that's not advanced appropriated. I had a opportunity a little over a year ago to go to one of my CBOCs in the district, and going through the tour, empty room sitting there, had all been done, ready to take on a new x-ray machine, which was already paid for, ready to be delivered. But the fact that the IT budget wasn't advanced appropriated, they're waiting on the wire to be ran down the wall to hook the x-ray machine to the computer. We talk about access to care, and we're arguing over whether we're going to advance appropriate 14% of the budget, and you're holding up the ability to us to see seniors or see veterans and take care of them. I just wanted to point that out to kind of validate the chairman's position on this, and with that, I'll yield back.
Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Snyder. I wanted to sort of follow up on your testimony vis-a-vis the GAO reporting and your statement about it. You don't support that it be permanent. Is there any aspect of the legislation that could be changed to garner your support on this particular legislation?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think I'll defer to Mr. Fleming to respond to that.
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. We believe that the engagements that we have had historically with GAO have been productive and beneficial to VA. And we think that we benefit most when the reviews are of a focused nature.
Okay. And so you're saying that you would prefer to look at different issues within the report? Is that what you're saying?
Congressman, I would say
I mean, the
that
question was, how would you, is there any way that you would change it that would garner your support?
the reviews had the temporary engagement of GAO with these reviews have been beneficial for VA. They have improved the transparency of the VA budget to include additional information that have been included in our budget submissions, and we continue to look forward to working with GAO on the increasing the transparency of our budget submission.
And would you agree that in the past reports, correcting false assumptions in the calculations was beneficial to veterans' health care?
Congressman, I would say that noted in the GAO reports, that medical care budgeting is, as recognized by GAO, is inherently complex, from the long lead time that's required to develop our budget. And the budget reflects the best assumptions at the time we make that first budget. And through the iterative process, we have the opportunity to revisit those assumptions. And with more recent experience, we are able to further refine and improve our budget estimates.
Thank you. Would you agree that with the drawdown of forces in Afghanistan, and we're going to have many more veterans returning, with more medical issues probably in the history of our country, that some of those assumptions may change, and the accuracy of those assumptions are very, very important in terms of anticipating a much greater number of veterans returning? I mean, I strongly believe that in some sense we're going to be tested about how well we serve our returning veterans coming back from Afghanistan with so many medical issues. Do you believe that accuracy is important?
Thank you, Congressman. That's an excellent question. And yes, I would say that we also agree that the assumptions regarding the different characteristics of the various cohorts of veterans whom we serve are very important, and we constantly seek to understand the characteristics of the returning combat veterans so that we can best prepare to deliver the services that they so need.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Dr. Rowe?
I thank the chairman for yielding. There were five, look around the room, there were five of us in this room. Ms. Kirkpatrick, Sergeant Major Walls, myself, Mr. Michaud, Mr. Miller. We're here for the advanced probes debate that we first started when I guess Chairman Filner and Ranking Member Brewer were sitting in those chairs over there. And I had to be convinced, because all of my political background as a mayor and so forth had been on a yearly budget. I think it's been wildly successful. I talked to my local VA people at home. They love the advanced appropriations, knowing what their budget's going to be for 2 years. And I was hoping that the VA would set the example and model for the whole government. I really think many states do a biannual budget now. Texas is one that comes to mind. And it stops all this silliness we do it seems like every other day here. We start in the budget again in the fall. And I think the VA, I can't imagine why you wouldn't embrace that. I can see no logic for your reason to oppose what the chairman just talked about. I truly don't. When something's working, the VSOs wanted it, and it turns out they were absolutely right. It has worked very well, so that come September 30, a VA doesn't know whether they can hire a nurse. They know they can now. As John talked about, I mean, how silly is that, not having the wire ready because of a budget hiccup? So I'd like to know why you wouldn't. I haven't heard a reason yet. So just with all the positives that we know that have happened, and we had this debate, I recall it very well right in this room, that we went through on this advanced appropriation. So I'll turn the floor over to you.
Well, Mr. Congressman, thank you. Let me clarify. We are not stating that we are opposed to the bill. We are stating that we do not have a position today on the bill. And again, this is, we do not have a position until the administration can complete this across the government review. The implications that this kind of multi-year appropriations would have on the rest of government besides VA. So again, we are not stating that we oppose the bill.
Make sure I understand what you just said. You're not for it or you're not against it?
We are not taking a position today, sir.
Okay, and the reason you're not taking a position when you know that 86% of it works just fine is because of what?
The administration needing to do an across-the-government review of what those implications mean to other programs and other agencies besides the VA.
And when will that be due? When will we have that information? Will it be in my 4th or my 5th term? I'm in my 3rd term now.
Sir, I know this committee is very, very eager to get our position, but I'm not in a position to comment on, to speculate on when that timeline might be done for the review.
So it may be infinity. We don't know when it will be.
Sir, I do not know.
I yield back.
Mr. Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Snyder, as Dr. Rowe mentioned, I was on the committee in 2009 when we authorized the advanced appropriations, and it was supposed to be a paradigm shift for the VA. And please keep in mind that every member of the committee wants the VA to operate as efficiently and as effectively as possible because that's what our veterans deserve. And so you're here today to tell us that you can't tell us the advantages or disadvantages of the advanced appropriation paradigm shift. Is that correct?
Congresswoman, let me affirm that we also want to work as efficiently and as effectively as possible. And we can't comment on the impacts that the multi-year appropriations has had on our medical care accounts. I'll defer to Mr. Fleming or Ms. Tierney. They can comment. Helen, you want to comment on the effects of the multi-year appropriations?
Excuse me, we realize that, but it's that's 14% that the chairman talked about that you're not willing to go forward on, and it is puzzling. And so I just want to know, are you not seeing improvements in that area?
We have seen improvements. I'm very, very appreciative of the multi-year appropriations that we have for our medical accounts. It does enhance our ability to plan for our medical budgets. It does ensure uninterrupted services for our medical accounts. But we cannot take a position on the extending of those authorizations or appropriations to our other discretionary accounts at this time.
Until you do the government-wide review. And whose decision was that there had to be a government-wide review before the VA could take a position?
That is the administration position, ma'am.
The VA administration? The presidential, what do you mean by the administration?
I really can't get into the internal decision-making, but we have been required to take a broad view, a government-wide view of what the implications are on these changes for the government at large. Not just.
Well, maybe you can answer this for me. I mean, what exactly do you mean by a government-wide review? Does that mean every governmental agency in this country has to report? I mean, what exactly does that mean?
The federal government, the federal agencies and departments will be involved in this review.
Can you tell the committee which ones?
Ma'am, that's really beyond my scope of expertise and responsibility. I'll be happy to take that question for the record.
Well, it is a little frustrating, Mr. Snyder, and please excuse my frustration, but the whole point is that we were able to serve our veterans. And as Dr. Rose said, how long do we have to wait for this? But let me just condense it in terms of the VA. Has the VA started its review? Because I'm assuming the VA is going to have to report to OMB as part of this government-wide review. Suppose agencies haven't even started this process. How long is this going to take? But let me just condense it to what is the VA doing in terms of their piece of this review?
Congresswoman, until this larger administration review is done, I cannot comment.
I'm sorry, Mr. Snyder, but aren't you part of the larger administrative review?
We will be.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'm frustrated, so I guess let me ask one other question. In terms of your strategic planning and programming, you said you modeled that after other agencies. Can you tell us what agencies you used to model that?
We took lessons learned from other agencies. I wouldn't say we modeled it. We took the lessons learned from various agencies, including DOD, DHS, NASA, and others. But we really got to modify this to fit the VA. And we found that this is more of a change management or a culture change as opposed to a technical solution. So we've taken lessons learned pieces from various agencies, things they do well and don't do well. But we're really trying to adopt something that works in our environment and in 3 administrations that we support.
Well, to end on a positive note, I commend you for that, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I think for the committee's knowledge, this bill that everybody seems to be focusing on right now, in addition to the other 2 pieces of legislation that we are, it was filed in February. The Senate, there's a Senate companion that's out there, and VA testified before the Senate 2 months ago on the bill. And so I think what's frustrating to all of us is that we're still having witnesses come to us to tell us there is no position. To further expound, we're talking about a roughly $130+ billion budget. This bill deals with about $8 billion over 10 years. And for some reason there's a hang-up, and we're going to find out what it is from these witnesses or somebody. I can't for the life of me figure out why they would not want to jump at the opportunity to expand on what has already been described by many here and many veteran service organizations, and the department probably itself has been wildly successful that we did the 2-year advanced appropriations. So I'm just as frustrated, Ms. Kirkpatrick, as you are, but we will continue to prod and ask questions. Mr. O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate your convening this hearing and the work that you and the ranking member have done, especially to bring these issues to our attention. And I fully support H.R. 813. Makes a lot of sense. I have the sense that you support it too. I mean, the logical conclusion of some of the things that you've said about the 86% of the VA's budget that is working so well would lead me to believe that you think this would be a good thing for the rest of the VA, the remaining 14%, but that you are prevented from saying so, unfortunately, by the administration. So we clearly have your unclear statements on 813 that you can't take a position. On 806, you are supportive?
No, sir. The VA does not believe that those provisions need to be made permanent in statute.
And the VA Budget Planning Reform Act, the draft bill, you said you agreed with the intent and the goal, but had some problems with some of the means and methods. Are there any improvements to that you could recommend that would lead you to be supportive of it?
Again, the main issue with the proposed bill is that we think that many of those provisions need to be codified by directive and internal documentation, and at least one more cycle of PBE conducted within the department before we try to codify things in statute. PBBE within the VA, the various processes are at various places of maturity. And we think we need to level that out and get more maturity in all phases before that's documented in statute.
And then for you or for Ms. Tierney, to follow up on Mr. Runyon's anecdote about the facility that has everything except for the cabling or fiber that needs to be run to connect it. How do you resolve that disconnect right now in the VA when you have the advanced appropriations for so much of what VHA needs, and you're dependent upon something in that other 14% that's not there right now? How widespread are the problems that Mr. Runyon highlighted with his anecdote, and how do you resolve them?
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. There are indeed sometimes disconnects with having the advanced appropriation and having other parts of the organization under a CR. When the budget is eventually passed, we're able to do the new work. We're able to continue doing the same work we did the year before under a continuing resolution, but it does make for some disconnects.
And then the last thing that I'd say is I've only been here for a little over 6 months, and I've found this committee to work in a very bipartisan fashion, in a very supportive fashion of the VA. And I think we all of us want to get to the same place and deliver the best quality care and service to the veterans who serve this country. And I know that you do, and I think you know that our committee does. And so I think we all want to work cooperatively, but it is obviously very frustrating and very difficult when we can't get a clear response on an effort made by the chairman in this committee to improve your ability to deliver those services to the veterans. So hopefully we can rectify that soon, and I want to continue to work cooperatively, but this is, as you've heard from everyone, a very frustrating experience. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke, and I also would like to clarify the record. My comment about $8 billion over 10, it's actually $8 billion for 1 year. Mr. Waltz.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Thank you all for being here. Advanced appropriations was a cause of mine for many years. I'm proud of the work we did on it, and I think Dr. Rowe was right. There was some skepticism here because the charge leveled was government on autopilot, and we wanted to be concerned that wasn't the case. We wanted to make sure we got it right. I guess my frustration last day, there's drama here today that doesn't need to be drama. That's very frustrating, and I'm trying to get at it, and I understand the constraints you're under from the administration's position. If you can take back anything, they don't need drama in this. We're with you. We're there. We're getting this. We want to help. If there are concerns about this final 14%, and Mr. Runyon's case is exactly right, and I've heard that from other medical facilities, having the two disconnected is just plain stupid, and it should be in here one way or another. So I get it. You're not going to be able to tell us. I get it that you're not going to say that, but we've got 1,300 federal and state programs helping veterans. We've got 40,000 nonprofits in this country. It makes sense to have a rational, coordinated plan to use our resources wisely to deliver care for veterans. That's all we're trying to get at. So I won't ask where I know you're not going to be able to answer, but if you could take back a message, there is no need for drama in the service of veterans. Help us figure this one out. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waltz. Mr. Runyon, did you have any other questions? Mr. Michaud.
Just one. So run us through the process, Mr. Snyder. When you come before Congress, you have to submit your testimony to OMB. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Congressman.
Does OMB have to approve your testimony?
They do.
And if they don't, you have to modify it to their liking?
That is correct.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, it might be worthwhile maybe in September to haul OMB in here, see how they're coming along with their big vision, how they want the government to look at this advanced appropriation, because I'm sure by September they'll have a lot of progress. And maybe we ought to get the time frame when they started it and where they want to move forward, because I think Congressman Waltz is absolutely right. Why OMB does not want this is just amazing, since it is a small portion of the VA budget. And if this truly is a top priority of the President, the First Lady, then I don't know why OMB is taking a contrary position of what they are at least saying publicly about supporting veterans. So hopefully the administration will get on the same page, and whoever it is over OMB that wanted the testimony to be changed, if it was in fact changed, I think we ought to find out and see where they're coming with this whole process.
Thank you very much. Members, any other questions? To the witnesses, thank you so much for being here with us today. Some of us probably will have some questions that we want to submit to you as a follow-up. We would appreciate a timely response. You may or may not be aware this committee now has a site on its website posted, Trials in Transparency. It specifically deals with the almost 100 requests that we now have from this committee forwarded to the Department of Veterans Affairs that we have yet to get an answer for. And, you know, again, I think a timely response is within 30 days. So expect, if we don't get a response, that you will join your cadre of friends at the central office as stars of trials and transparency. Thank you. You're excused. And as they are moving, if we could ask the second panel to come forward. Okay, thank you to our second panel of witnesses, and I'm going to run through this rapidly, but I want to thank you for being here today, and on behalf of the independent budget co-authors, we're going to hear from Carl Blake with the National Legislative Director of the Paralyzed American Veterans of America. Mr. Blake is accompanied by Adrian Atizado, the Assistant National Legislative Director at DAV, Ray Kelly, the Director of National Legislative Service for Veterans of Foreign Wars, and Diane Zamato, National Legislative Director of AMVETS. We're also going to hear from Mr. Louis Celli, the Director of the National Legislative Division of the American Legion. With that, again, I say thank you very much for being here. Mr. Blake, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin, Mr. Michaud, I'd like to say if you get OMB on a panel here in front of you in September, we would really like to be able to sit on the dais with you because I'm sure we have as many questions as you do. On behalf of the co-authors of the independent budget, AMVETS, DAV, PVA, and VFW, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be here to testify today. First, let me express our sincere thanks to you, Mr. Chairman, and to Ranking Member Michaud for taking the lead on this issue of funding for VA and introducing H.R. 813. It certainly makes sense. We've seen the benefits that have been reaped by the Veterans Health Administration by being removed from political bickering and partisan fights that have basically hamstrung the ability to do the work of the federal government or of the Congress. As such, the independent budget wholeheartedly endorses H.R. 813, and we're committed to work with you and with the Senate to see this through to final enactment. Similarly, we'd like to thank Ms. Brownlee for introducing H.R. 806 that would make permanent the GAO reporting requirement. This legislation actually reflects an explicit recommendation included in the independent budget for fiscal year 2014, and as such, we wholeheartedly endorse that as well. With regards to the draft bill, the Department of Veterans Affairs Budget Planning Reform Act of 2013, we'd like to thank you, Mr. Michaud, for placing an added emphasis on the need for meaningful strategic planning with the VA. However, at this time, the IB has no formal position on the legislation, and we do have some concerns that we outline in greater detail. First, we're not yet certain that a strategic planning framework designed specifically for the Department of Defense, the QDR, and similarly for the Department of Homeland Security and the QHR, would be appropriate for the VA, and I think the VA sort of outlined that concern as well. There are obviously fundamental differences between the missions of the Department of Defense and the VA, and also between DHS and VA. That raise concerns about whether VA should be required to use the same planning structures and methods designed specifically to evaluate DoD's future roles and missions. While the worldwide threats and missions associated with those threats are always evolving, requiring constant review and reevaluation by DoD and DHS, the fundamental roles and missions of the VA and veterans policy in general rarely, if ever, need to shift so quickly or dramatically based on external events or influences. While presidential elections may often lead to large swings in national security policy, our nation's longstanding commitment to veterans has remained clear and steadfast for 150 years. Second, it's not clear whether the creation of a future year veterans program will lead to either more transparent or more accurate budgets or appropriations. Although the QDR and QHR are readily available online, it does not appear that the FHDP or HSP are similarly available, calling into question the transparency that might be produced by this legislation. In fact, the VA just testified and included in their testimony that they had submitted this year their first FYVP. Where is it? Has the committee seen it? I know we haven't seen it. There's already a concern about transparency in doing a future year veterans program. I know the intent of the legislation, I think, is to overcome that hurdle And if we can be convinced that that would be the case, then that would certainly move us towards the area of support for the legislation, but we still stand with no position at this point. Similarly, there are significant unanswered questions concerning the role of the Office of Management and Budget, which we've already hashed out in the previous panel. Since the draft bill requires that the administration's budget be consistent with the FYVP budget estimates, would OMB have a direct or indirect ability to revise or constrain the budget and appropriations levels contained in the FYVP? In setting out policy guidance to the individual program offices, the Secretary is required to inform them of resource levels projected to be available as they make their budget estimates. Would these levels come directly or indirectly from OMB? We already know that on some level that's what happens, but I'm not sure that this process would necessarily draw that out even further. Until these questions and the ones that are included in our written statement are better addressed and satisfactorily answered, we will withhold our support for the legislation. That being said, Mr. Michaud and Mr. Miller, we certainly appreciate the extreme amount of time that your staffs have spent with us over the last couple of weeks in hashing out this legislation in particular and helping us get a better understanding of the long-term intent of the legislation. And we feel confident that if we continue to work together, we can come to a final agreement that would probably lead us in the direction of some level of support. But we still would like to get some better answers to our questions. That being said, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Mr. Celli, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. America's veterans deserve sufficient, timely, and predictable funding for VA programs. We would certainly like to echo the chairman's opening comments when he described the entire country, how the entire country has watched the budget squabbles and territorial infighting of Congress over the last several years. We're proud to say that this committee has steadfastly risen above the fray and maintained a bipartisan spirit of cooperation between the veterans with veterans programs still suffering from the specter of government shutdown, sequestration, and a bitterly divided budget landscape that has led to stopgap continuing resolutions in the place and passage of real budget legislation. Chairman Miller, Ranking Member Michaud, and distinguished members of this committee, on behalf of Commander Couts and the 2.4 million members of the American Legion, I thank you and your colleagues for the work that you do, and especially your bipartisan dedication for getting it right, the American veterans and their families. My remarks this morning reflect the overview of the American Legion's full statement for the record, which is provided as part of our witness testimony. When Congress passed the Veterans Health Care Budget Reform Transparency Act in 2009, the intent was quite clear: ensure sufficient, timely, and predictable funding to care for those who have worn the nation's uniform. The key improvements was the authorization of Congress to approve investments in medical care for veterans 1 year in advance to allow VA to more effectively plan for the future and ensure veterans would get the quality care that they have earned. And the American Legion, together with our VSO partners, aggressively worked with Congress to make this happen. Over the past couple of years, the American Legion has come to recognize how important it has been for VA to be included in advance appropriations, and certainly sees the wisdom of this committee to include the remaining VA accounts in this process. We also want to be clear about one thing: the advance appropriation does not insulate VA or veterans from the total effects of sequestrations as commonly thought. Future VA budget authorizations are still subject to budget caps in accordance with the Budget Control Act, which could reduce the assistance we're able to provide our veterans and disabled veteran population. And so, the American Legion strongly supports the passage of H.R. 813, as it takes yet another important step toward protecting the promise this country has made to our nation's veterans to care for those who have borne the battle. While the American Legion is unable to take a formal position regarding the draft legislation, the Department of Veteran Affairs Budget Planning Reform Act of 2013, because the proposal is too new for us to have had the opportunity to evaluate it through our commission process, and therefore do not have a resolution that speaks to this initiative, I'd like to touch on a couple of the provisions that we've highlighted in our testimony, and that will be the main topic of our discussion among our voting members. The American Legion is a conservative organization, fiscally conservative organization, that firmly believes in a strong planning process. We think that the fundamental reason that this legislation was introduced is sound. That much we support. When VSOs hear a proposal for yet another commission, I have to be honest with you, we groan, because we work day in and day out with your committee staff members, and commissions always seem to seek to pull in folks that aren't in the daily process of working with you, and we wonder, where do we fit in? So those are one of the concerns that we have. And we just want to make sure that we're not developing yet another paper tiger, as we've discussed with your staff. So these are some of the things that our members are going to be discussing. I want to thank you for inviting the American Legion to share our thoughts on these positions and these important pieces of legislation. We definitely look forward to working together, and we too are very frustrated with the VA's position of not being able to support advance appropriation. And if we look back at history, we'll see that the first time advance appropriation was discussed in this chamber, VA also took no position, yet they seem to really enjoy the benefits of that today. With that, I yield. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I'll yield myself 5 minutes for questions. And if I recall, the president actually in the 08 election, he ran on advanced appropriation. So there very clearly was a position being taken by this current administration, albeit he was a candidate at that time. But I don't remember near the hesitation, and most of you at the table were here during that time. Does anybody remember the kind of hesitation that we heard from the first panel? Anybody?
Maybe from a member of Congress, but certainly not from the administration.
Mr. Blake, you may recall that when the original advanced appropriation bill made its way through the Congress, that both the IT and medical research accounts were included in the House-passed version of the legislation. Your testimony regarding these two accounts reaffirms that position. Explain to us why these two accounts in particular complement the existing medical care accounts.
Well, I think Mr. Runyon clearly sort of laid out the importance of IT and its role as it relates to health care, particularly with the way that VA delivers state-of-the-art health care with its electronic health record and everything now. And absent some of the structures in place as new health care services come online, obviously that could be negatively impact on the IT side. On the research side, you have a lot of overlap where providers are also researchers, and a lot of the work, there's a lot of crossover, and so you can have an impact on their daily activities based on the fact that while they deliver care in some setting, they also do research. So I think honestly, and we're all on record, I think, as saying that it makes no sense for all of VA not to be an advance appropriated, to just get it out of the political wrangling that is going on every single day here on the Hill.
If anybody, but again, Mr. Celli, Mr. Blake, you can comment from a facility standpoint. I think a strong argument can be made that with advanced funding of construction projects, better planning could occur and contracts could be awarded in a timely fashion with the potential result of being on time, being on budget, and I think that would be a welcome change in this process. But what are your thoughts on the construction side?
It would absolutely be very helpful. I don't know if it's going to make them on time or under budget or on budget. It would be setting them in the right direction, though. There is continual overlap. There are layers of these construction projects that can get delayed because of budget stops. So it's very important for construction to be advanced appropriated.
You know, I'd also like to add that the VA saw fit to try to project what the rest of the federal government was going to do with regard to advanced appropriations, but with regard to them being able to establish contracts and work with the small business community in in an economic climate that is just now trying to get back on its feet, you know, the impact that the VA has when it comes to contracting, especially through construction. There are billions of dollars that filter into our communities, and if those dollars can't be counted on by small businesses that are in the business of working to supply the government with their needs, then they can't count on keeping their businesses viable and prosperous either. So the advance appropriations gives the VA the opportunity to be able to plan for these projects, to be able to tell the contractors that we're going to start a particular project on a date that we've agreed on, and then get them paid in a timely manner.
Let me read you just a real quick portion of the President's signing statement. The new medical equipment that isn't purchased, the construction of new facilities and clinic that isn't started, the new programs for medical care that are delayed. So even the President, I think, in his signing statement, albeit the construction side did not apply, I think he is agreeing that that is a good thing, that we would advance and move in that direction. Mr. Michaud.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In my closing opening statement, I mentioned change is hard. And not everyone comfortable, I know, with the changes in the draft legislation. And I think there's also some misconception about it. Mr. Celli, you mentioned don't need another commission. It's not a commission. And I'm glad the American Legion is looking at fiscal matters, because that's what the whole idea behind this is, to force VA, members of Congress, the VSOs to look forward, to plan ahead, so that we will not be wasting money. And that is a whole idea, but it's not a commission. You also mentioned, Mr. Celli, that the concern about the VSOs and what role they play. Actually, this legislation is very clear. VSOs are called out specifically for their participation in this process. But it's not only the VSOs, and it shouldn't be only the VSOs as it relates to this process. So I know change is hard. Mr. Blake, you had mentioned in your opening statement about DOD. The legislation does not require the DOD process for VA. And as you heard, the VA actually does a similar process. It's not the model that DOD and DHS has, but it follows some of the areas that they're focused on, that long-term planning that has to happen. So it doesn't require them, and it shouldn't require them to follow the DOD or the DHS process. You'd mentioned also, Mr. Blake, when you look at future year program for other departments that are available for Congress, both DOD and DHS are classified, and that information is not public. So the whole idea behind this is to force VA, Congress, and veterans organizations to look, and other groups, to look forward in their long-term planning. And I know change is hard, and I would encourage each of you to look at what the actual draft bill does, not what you're, that you anticipate that it might do, because it is something that hasn't been done before. It's a new approach as it relates to the Department of Veterans Administration, but the Department of Veterans Administration is the second largest federal agency. And we got to do a better job in making sure what finite resources that we have to spend to provide the services for our veterans and their families, that planning is in place. And that hasn't been done before. Unfortunately, we've been dealing with crisis mode after crisis mode, whether it's dealing with the Veterans Health Administration, now dealing with Veterans Benefit side as far as the backlog. And the whole purpose of this legislation is to codify some of the stuff that VA is currently doing, but also to look at long-term perspective of how we are going to take care of our veterans and their families long-term. And it really focuses on thinking outside the box, and that's what it's all about. So I'd encourage each of you to really look at it, to work with our staffs as we move forward in this regard, and to think long-term. as far as where we are going to go to help support those who wore the uniform, protecting this great nation of ours. And I know that the realm of budgeting might not be a sexy topic because we just look at the bottom line, whether they got the money or not, but we do have to do a much better job in moving forward in this regard and provide the services that we need for our veterans. So, and just hearing your two testimonies earlier, there is some misconception what it does, and what you both said as far as the commission or a DOD process is not what actually the bill does, and that's why I encourage you to continue work with our staff so that we can move forward. And I appreciate all that your individual organizations are doing to hold the VA accountable as well as Congress accountable, and look forward to working with you as we move forward with the chairman's legislation with advanced appropriation for all of VA, because I think it's absolutely the right way to go, and I feel confident that my colleagues will agree so also. As far as OMB, I can't wait to see what they have to do, and I agree with Mr. Blake. If we do have OMB in here, I'd suggest we might want to put them under oath as well, so we can hold them accountable for what they are saying before this committee. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back to balance my time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rowe. With your indulgence, I'd like to recognize Dr. Winstrup. Oh, Dr. Rowe.
Thank the chairman, and thank you all for being here. And I think the last paragraph of the testimony here from Mr. Blake, I think pretty much says it all. We believe that our nation has no higher obligation than to ensure that the men and women who've served in our armed forces receive all the benefits and services owed to them in a timely manner. This legislation will help guarantee that promise is kept. I think that's all that needs to be said. And I appreciate, first of all of your service, and then the support that you've given. I think, as I said just a minute ago, I think that the VSOs that pushed for this, and 4 years ago, I guess, when we had this debate in this very room, I think it's been a resounding success. Everything I've heard at home from our local VA medical center has been very positive. And I can't imagine why we wouldn't, and Mr. Michaud has said this, or the chairman has said this, why we wouldn't just do this. And I've told the secretary, I said, I want you to be sure that this works. I remember having the conversation with him, because I think this can be a model for the entire federal government. It's so big now, why don't we do a lot of advanced probes over 2 years, and then take the second year we're here and fine-tune these things and get it right, instead of having to go through the same process again, and come 30 September, you have to shut something down because we haven't done our job here. And think about all this CR and all this nonsense that we've done. The one shining part of the budget's been the VA because it hasn't been affected. The money's been appropriated and ready. So I don't have any questions. I'll certainly yield to you all if you want to comment about it, but I appreciate your testimony and your support for this for now 4 years that I've been here.
Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just wanted to take the opportunity, because I haven't stated so far, that how much I support your bill today, H.R. 813, and that's why I'm a co-author of the bill, and certainly believe it's the right thing for us to do at this moment in time. And of course, I'm focusing a little bit on H.R. 806 because I want to get the bill right, and would love to work with you on that to make that happen. And I think it can be an important complement to the direction of H.R. 813. So having said that, I'll continue to question around H.R. 806, which leads me to ask a question to Mr. Blake. And Mr. Blake, I appreciate your testimony and support of H.R. 806. And I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit on your testimony and just inform us a little bit about why the PVA supports making the GAO review permanent.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee, for that question. First, it's not just PVA. The independent budget as a larger entity of the four organizations endorsed the legislation. As I mentioned earlier, it's a specific recommendation in this year's independent budget. You know, I think we've seen, I can make an argument that we wish GAO would even go a little farther in their reporting when they've done their reports on the advanced appropriations. But every year that they've provided a report, they've clearly identified where there were deficiencies that existed. The most glaring has been in non-recurring maintenance, which seems like a small and unsexy thing, but it has a direct upwards connection to medical care because it's still in the medical facilities portion, and it drives a lot of the larger funding assumptions and plans for VA, and then ultimately it has an impact on construction and things like that. And so GAO has dug in and found some things and brought to light issues that the VA is that we would probably never seen otherwise, or we might have questioned without any real solid evidence. So they provided us with an opportunity, and we believe it seemed like to me the VA said, and I know it's in their testimony, that they have had benefit from having an interaction with GAO and this reporting requirement. So if they've reaped a benefit from it, I'm not sure that there's a downside to continuing to do it. But apparently they've reaped a benefit, but they don't want to do it anymore. At least that's the way their statement seemed to suggest. But from our perspective, it's certainly something that should be continued.
Thank you. And Mr. Selly, in your testimony, I'm not sure that you stated it, but I think in your written testimony, you noted that the American Legion has really no official position on H.R. 806. And so I'm just curious to know, has the Legion reviewed the GAO reports, and did the Legion find the reports useful in the past?
Thank you, Congresswoman Brownlee. And we have reviewed the GAO reports. We do find them to be a benefit. And the reason that we were unable to take a position at the time is because this is such a new piece of legislation that we haven't had a chance to put it before our commission to get a resolution. As a resolutions-based organization, we carry forth the will of our membership, as do you with your constituents. I can tell you that, again, as a predominantly fiscally conservative organization, we like good things. The GAO report is a good thing. VA being required to look ahead, to spend their money in a prudent manner, to be able to plan for good programs is a good thing. The American Legion is always going to support that. When it comes to officially supporting the bill, we need to run it through our commission, get a resolution on it, which we have our annual meeting coming up in the end of August, and I'm sure at that time a lot of the bills that we were unable to previously take positions on formally will then be codified, and we'll be able to tell you one way or the other where we're going to come down on that.
Thank you, sir, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is really, I want to hear from each member of the panel, and I thank you for being here today, and thank you for your service and commitment to our veterans. Regarding the VA's current budget submissions, do you feel that there is sufficient detail for you to adequately represent your memberships? And let's start here on the right-hand side and then just go to the left. I'd just like to hear specifically to you, to whatever groups you're serving.
Thank you for the question. Sorry. I'm not sure that I quite understand what it is that you're looking for, however.
Do you feel that the current budget submissions by the VA has adequate detail, or would you recommend that there be additional items of detail put into the current budget submissions?
I would say that budget is not my area of expertise as far as the independent budget body is concerned, but just from my point of view, it does seem that we are provided with quite a bit of information. I don't know, what is not being included per se. So at this point, I would just say that we get quite a bit of information, and we appreciate that, and we just follow everything that's happening. We know what the issues are, and we hope that that the budget is going to be able to meet the needs of our veterans.
Mr. Chelley?
Thank you, and that is an excellent question, because the budget is so massive. I don't think that there is any single organization, nonprofit organization, veteran service organization, that can fully analyze the complete budget. So what we do is we end up looking at those portions of the budget that apply to the programs that we're intimately involved in. With respect to that, there's always going to be a level of detail that we're going to want to ask more questions on, and we've been pretty successful in working directly with the program offices of the Department of Veteran Affairs to get the answers we're looking for with regard to their budget requirements and what it is they plan to pay for with those dollars. Some of the other stuff like construction, I'll let my colleagues address with regard to, VBA, with regard to, looking at specific line items. It really, it's a difficult and long process, which is why, we have hearings on it, and then we not only look at the VA's budget, and then we look at the proposed budget from each of the chambers. It takes us quite a bit of time. So is there enough detail? Yes and no. It really depends on the line item. Are there enough hours in the day, to dedicate solely to looking at the budget? Definitely not. But overall, to answer your question, we could always use more detail. More detail and more commitment on behalf of the budget is always a good thing.
Mr. Blake, let me change my question just slightly. It sounds like you could use more detail. Do you feel like you have a timely response from the VA when you request more detail on the budget? That's really what I'm trying to get to.
That's a wholly different question there. I thought you were going to ask it first if we thought it was sufficient in the first place.
Well, please, you can answer that first.
You didn't ask that question.
Answer that first, but then I'd like to know if you request additional detail.
Usually when our questions get answered, it's in the budget briefings when they first release it, and we sort of cobble together questions, and then we just spread out over time continuing questions. I can say that as part of this hearing, and this is sort of about Mr. Michaud's intent, if they're doing long-term planning, that's something we would like to see for certain. They said they're doing it. It's in their testimony, and that was the first I had heard. I'm aware that that's what they're doing, but I'd like to know more detail. I actually have a little bit of fear because in their testimony they also say that they don't want to be mandated to provide certain types of information. I can see why they might feel that way because one of our concerns that we outline in our testimony is that kind of information leading to benchmarks that don't allow for the proper evaluation in coming years as part of long-term planning. So if there's I'd say to your question, yes, they're pretty responsive for the most part when we have an issue that we need to have addressed.
But as I understand your answer, you would like more detail about the planning. Okay. My time has expired, Mr. Kelly, so you're off the hook, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kelly, you're welcome to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we could probably get better explanation. I think they give us a pretty good outline, but there are times we'll ask for specific. I'll use construction as an example. I'll just use round numbers. We'll appropriate $1 billion for a new project, but $100 million of that will be towards that project. The other $900 million will be paying old projects, and I would like to understand that process a little bit better. I can't get an answer of how that money shifted and shuffled around. So that specifically, sure, we could use that information, make better decisions, better long-term planning from that.
Mr. Waltz.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. As I said earlier, I know they couldn't answer us, and I hear from you guys. And I think, Carl, you brought up a great point that we need to be careful about setting the benchmarks. It goes back that are unrealistic in getting this right. But I still feel like the lack of transparency here makes it harder for you to do your job of caring for veterans. And so if we push this to get those answers, anything you can do to make that happen, I would be grateful for too. So I believe in this. I believe in it the first time around. I believe it's the right thing to do again. And we can continue to improve upon that process to make sure we don't get that, budgeting on autopilot without concerns for changing situations. So I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Members, any other? Oh, no. I'm sorry. You're hidden over there. Mr. O'Rourke, I'm sure you have questions.
Thank you. Really, I just actually wanted to afford Mr. Attisato the opportunity, if he wanted to add anything to what the other BSO representatives have said in response to these questions and on how we improve both our strategic planning process and the merit of these three bills here.
Thank you, Congressman. First of all, under the overarching idea in our testimony about wanting more transparency and obviously more data is really required of us as an organization to determine whether VA is in fact meeting a couple of things: meeting the veterans' needs, meeting the promises they have made, and making sure that the money is being spent most efficiently. So all these three bills kind of tend tilt towards that end. And I just want to reiterate what Carl had mentioned. I think Mr. Michaud, you had, and the rest of the committee had picked up, is that we do want to work towards that goal, and we think it's a worthy goal. To your question, ma'am, about whether there's enough information, I would say this: I don't know if I don't know if I would want any more information than what VA provides in its budget submission, simply because that straddles between reality, policy, and politics. And I think when we dive into the actual programs and the delivery of services is where the questions come up as far as the actual data and the limitations of that data in describing how VA is going to achieve its purpose. And I think I've said enough. Thank you.
I appreciate your answer to that, and I want to thank all the VSO representatives for the work that you do and the organizations that you represent. And I also want to note and thank the representatives from the VA who stayed around to listen to your testimony. And they obviously couldn't say a lot during their panel, but the fact that they're here to listen as well, I think is important and significant. So I want to thank them. And Mr. Chairman, thank you. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. As previously stated, all members will have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks and add any extraneous material that they think is necessary. We do appreciate both panels of witnesses. Thank you, VA, for staying with us through the second panel. We appreciate it. And once again, everybody, to the members, thanks for being here. This hearing's adjourned.